Hello and welcome to Africa Update, where we bring you what's happening on the great black continent, rich with so many things. And this week we have quite a lot for you. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back. It's Africa Update here on Trust TV, and I'm your host, Chiamaka Nwafor. Like I said earlier, we have quite a lot to talk about. I want to start with the big one that's happening in Republic of Chad, where the Constitutional Council has confirmed Mohammed Idris Deby as president. Now, on Thursday, May 16, the Constitutional Council of Chad confirmed him as the country's president with 61% of the vote, which is far ahead of his rivals, Success Masra and Albert Pahini Paddock. Now, Mohammed Idris Deby was declared the winner after the council reviewed and reaffirmed vote counts despite minor adjustments. Deby won 61.03%, followed by his prime minister with 18.54% and Paddock with 16.93%. Now, voter turnout was 75.78%. Following the announcement, the former Prime Minister, Success Masra, took to social media and accepted the decision, urged for calm and patience among his supporters, emphasizing political solutions over further legal action. Equally, Paddock's campaign, represented by his director, accepted the council's decision, calling for unity and urging the new president to address the country's challenges. Now, let's take a look at what happened.
On Thursday, May 16, the Constitutional Council of Chad confirmed Mohammed Idris Deby as the country's president with 61% of the vote, far ahead of his rivals Success Masra and Albert Pahini Paddock. Mohammed Idris Deby was declared the winner after the council reviewed and reaffirmed vote counts, despite minor adjustments. Deby won with 61.03%, followed by his Prime Minister, 18.54%, and Paddock with 16.93%. Voter turnout was 75.78%. Following the announcement, Success Masra took to social media, accepting the decision and urging calm and patience among his supporters, emphasizing political solutions over further legal action. Mohammed Idris Deby's camp expressed satisfaction, celebrating the election as a fulfilled promise of the transitional period. N'Djamena remained calm and largely deserted after the final results.
Now, joining me right here in the studio to further look at this issue and other issues is Haruna Warkani, former diplomat. Good evening, Ambassador. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Awesome.
Okay, so you said that story, and prior to this, when he won, the former Prime Minister Success went on to say that no, there were irregularities, but now we can see that the Constitutional Council has said he won these elections. Now, what do you make of this?
Well, for us in Africa, this is one other outcome of elections that remains questionable. Questionable in the sense that from the beginning of the campaigns, you could see the opposition parties, a coalition of the opposition parties, have been unhappy with the setting, the structural setting of the country. And this is understandable because Mohammed Deby, as a candidate, first and foremost, he came in through some means that are not wholesome.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, people have every good reason to doubt the sincerity of the electoral process.
Mm-hmm.
And this has been the main triggers for crisis in Africa. People manufacture ways to come to power or manufacture ways to retain power by any means, including crooked means, which leaves the general populace with very grave dissatisfaction. And I think this is exactly what has happened. You would see throughout the period of these campaigns, the complaints have been there. Opposition were not free. They don't have access to government media freely, as it were. Opposition parties were not free to express their opinions in some regard. And this is just promoting a dynasty. The father was there as the president, military. Today, he is here as a civilian president after the brief stint also as a military president.
Yes.
So these are settings that are already born with conflicts. And when they burst open, it becomes obvious that democracy has not come to stay the way it should be yet, because what we are doing to ourselves as Africans is far from what it should really be. Agreed, there's nowhere in the world that democracy perhaps might be perfect, but we need to do something better than what we are seeing.
Okay.
You cannot be installing people through some clandestine means, through manipulating the electoral process, the electoral institutions, including the courts, the judicial institutions that are supposed to verify or confirm or accept or endorse some of these things, have played roles that are not necessarily wholesome. And when that happens, you have sowed the seed of discord within the country, and that creates, necessary triggers for conflicts that when they come, they consume the whole nation and retard Africa's development. I think we need to observe some of these things. It's just like what happened in Togo recently. Good. You change over from a presidential system to a parliamentary system, under circumstances that are not wholesome.
Yes. Yes.
People are not happy. And when people are not happy, a lot of things can happen.
So it's safe to say that it seems like Africans are doing a monarchical kind of, I don't know if that word exists, but a monarchy or monarchical type of democracy here, passing it on from father to son.
Yeah, well, we started with the word dynasty. People are creating dynasties in Africa. For Nasimbe Iyadema in Togo, the father had been there for almost 50 years. The son has taken over. The other time we were here in Gabon, children who are 40 years or so did not know any other name of a president other than Umar Bongo, a Bongo family. Now, another one came until the military came and pushed him out. Equatorial Guinea, just name it. Uganda, right. Rwanda, though with a caveat. So many places, the system looks the same. It's a repetition of what happened in this country that is also operating in this country. Now, we can't continue this way because democracy and dynasty cannot coexist. The two, dynasty or monarchy and democracy, cannot coexist and thrive because they are two diametrically opposed themes of governance, right? And Africa is trying to say, yes, we can. And so you have people elected and people who inherited these positions. Therefore, we might not be far from conflict at any time because these things continue to pervade the African landscape, giving us a kind of serial failure in governance.
Okay. So, something happened here, and, a couple of us were discussing it in the newsroom, and, we're saying it's like the first time we're seeing military personnel vote in an election. Is that a common thing to happen? Because I know he was the military president, and I would expect that they will stay out of it to allow due process for a proper democratic elected person to come in. And did that in any way alter the numbers for him?
Well, the military or uniformed personnel are citizens of the country. Therefore, they are entitled to vote, just like any other citizen. The fact that you are not wearing uniform does not give you any advantage over the other. However, it is the process in which some of these things happen. You find places where this voting when it takes place inside the confines of the barracks, military barracks, for instance, yes, they are subject to manipulations.
Okay.
The society out there cannot believe that, yes, there was transparency in casting, counting, and collecting these votes. There must have been something that, because of political and administrative influences, surely it would have tilted the result somehow.
Okay.
And so, yes, people have a right to believe that the elections are not wholesome.
Okay. So we're still staying with election matters, but now we're going over to the southern part of Africa, South Africa. We see what's happening there. Now, after 30 years of ruling South Africa, the African National Congress is facing its toughest election yet. Now, polls are suggesting that it might lose its majority for the first time. Now, the ANC's reputation has suffered due to high unemployment, poverty, and corruption scandals. And President Cyril Ramaphosa is seeking a re-election in the May 29 ballot. Now, if ANC loses its majority, it will have to form a coalition government for the first time, potentially complicating policymaking in Africa's most advanced economy. And we have the issue of the former president, Jacob Zuma, who has decided to front a new opposition party, which is becoming a potential disruptor in these elections in South Africa. Now, Zuma's entrance into this election, how do you see that playing out?
Well, Zuma, we must understand, or go back a little backwards to where it ended, or had a comma, kind of. Zuma enjoyed the privilege of being a member of the ANC, got into office through that platform. However, the way he left office and the humiliation that followed, the court cases and what have you, now he has come back to say he wants a new party and is going to be in opposition. ANC definitely, since 1994, with the arrival of Mandela on the scene as the first free election to bring in a black president, essentially, if you follow what has been happening in Africa, or particularly South Africa, you will see that citizens are yet to enjoy the so-called dividends of democracy. Because even with the arrival of ANC on the scene, not much has changed in South Africa.
Really?
Yes. The real black people.
You said the real black people, are
yes,
they?
yes, the real black people, meaning there is a class of some black and some who are more black than others. Are still as poor as they were under apartheid. Nothing has changed. The economic structure remains the same. Opportunities that ought to have followed as a sign of the dividends of democracy never came. And so a large portion of this citizenry have lost hope in anything democracy or an indigenous African leadership in South Africa.
So it's safe to say that these people might actually want to move away from ANC and see if somebody has something else to offer.
Definitely.
But Zuma was ANC.
Yeah, well, Zuma was ANC. I said he exited the ANC party as a result of the humiliations he received. And now, let's say Zuma is a wounded lion. Because yes, they were calling the shots. Yes, from the beginning, they actually formed the ANC. They were real founding fathers of the ANC. However, coming forward after Mandela, so many things began to change. And for the people, the real citizens of South Africa, they may be changing the name of the president, but not in the fortune that citizens ought to enjoy. I think that is the greatest dichotomy that you find in the setting, which is creating more problems than solutions to Africa. Now, you can see the constant echoes of Malema has shown clearly that something is structurally wrong with that country. And it needs to be corrected going forward. Otherwise, we might begin to see upsurge of violence or conflict in the country.
But there's already some sort of violence in maybe not conflict, but you see quite a lot of stories of people are not safe moving about at night. In South Africa, the crime rate is a bit, so.
Well, South Africa generally, let me say, this is beyond just characterization.
Okay.
But South Africa as a country has naturally been a violent country. Even during the apartheid rule, some of the draconian or very strict rules that the apartheid government imposed on the country were as a result of direct reaction to what was going on.
No.
Car muggings, for instance, that you hardly will believe would happen in South Africa were so common on the streets of Johannesburg, sometimes Durban and Cape Town and the rest of them. So it is only places like Pretoria where the administrative enclave predominantly occupied by the whites, and then very strict law enforcement, that you see maybe very little of those kind of things. But for the other places, Soweto, for instance, Soweto cannot be as safe as any other African setting.
Why?
It was quite violent. You see people that women particularly cannot drive sometimes. That's how bad it has been. And
currently, right now?
Well, before and even now. That's why we are saying the economic fortunes of the country is yet to change.
Okay.
Security and good livelihood have a nexus.
Go hand in hand.
Yes, they go hand in hand. And so if the economy is not too good for the majority of citizens, you are expecting conflicts or at least some level of violence, which is what we are seeing in South Africa. The economic divergences are so wide. The real rich people are so rich, and the real poor people are so poor.
But that's not a case over the African continent.
Well, not just the African continent, perhaps the world. But you see, this is where governance, good governance, should come in to reduce the gap between the super rich and the super poor. However, in Africa, generally speaking, it has become very difficult for us to manage this. You have resources that are more than necessary enough to take care of everybody. And then few people corner these resources, making it practically impossible for the larger majority who own these things to have access to state resources. And so you see people living in abject poverty, and some are driving in SUVs, living in houses that are like mansions in heaven, in the same country, from the same source. I think that is the real conflict that South Africa is battling with, because you see, the expectation of people with the coming of black rule in Africa, in South Africa, was that they have finally found freedom. Unfortunately, they got political freedom, but not economic freedom.
Okay.
People are still unemployed. You go to the slums in Soweto and some other places, it is appalling, and therefore the ANC leadership, from the beginning, from Mandela himself to the present Cyril, it's unacceptable for them to explain to anyone why they have not been able to change the narrative and go close to achieving what the citizens of South Africa expected of a new regime.
Okay. All right. So there's so much to unpack there, but let's move to something else now. It's still about countries. Let's look at ECOWAS now, and that's the Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso situation. Now, on Tuesday, ECOWAS has said the decision of the three countries, that's Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger Republic, to leave the regional bloc is complicating the security situation in the region. Now, the Commissioner of Political Affairs, Peace and Security, ECOWAS, Abdel Fattah Musa, said this during a program tagged Reducing Vulnerabilities Through Partnerships, a stakeholders' engagement on regional defense and security perspectives. It was organized by the European Union in conjunction with the National Counterterrorism Center in Abuja on Wednesday. Now, the three military-led West African nations in January announced their immediate withdrawal from the regional bloc, accusing the body of becoming a threat to its members. According to Abdel, Burkina Faso has almost 50% of its geographic space taken over by terrorists, raising the alarm that Africa and the whole world would be in trouble if terrorists were allowed to have a solid base to launch attacks in West Africa. Now, he is saying that this country is now leaving, it's causing more problems, or going to cause more problems for the ECOWAS bloc. What do you think?
Well, the last coup, successful coup, let me say, in Niger, July last year, we were here and we did say the reaction of ECOWAS was kind of inappropriate, particularly for Nigeria and Niger as good neighbors.
Yes. I remember you saying they shouldn't have.
Very good. The switching of light, for instance, was quite unacceptable. And you can see the result it has produced. Now, these Sahel states, like they call themselves, have decided to leave ECOWAS. And they gave notice. The law requires them to give notice for up to a year, but they have decided that it was immediate, with immediate effect. And therefore, they have decided to violate the existing protocol because they also allege that their rights as sovereign nations had been violated. The threat of invasion from ECOWAS was also a big mistake because when some of these things happen, there are domestic issues that ought to be settled differently. Were it to be an external invasion of the ECOWAS space, and ECOWAS decides to mobilize forces using the standby force and what have you, and any other source for that matter, to ward off such invasion, that would have been different. But when you have skirmishes of democratic change of governance in some of these places, yes, the issue becomes that these democracies are dysfunctional. And as long as they remain dysfunctional, there is a repercussion. Citizens are simply not happy with the governance of these countries because almost all places, the three countries, the elections preceding the coups were suspect. They were not wholesome elections, and therefore people don't have any trust in the so-called democratic governance. And once you have that, you have created space and justification for any action that might come forward, which is what happened in Niger. The imposition of Bazoum as president was obviously not acceptable to the larger citizenry. However, because citizens' voices were muted, you feel the country was okay. But underneath the carpet, there was a simmering discontent. And that was what happened, translated into the military listening to the people and say, okay, we have reached a point where I think there is no going back. We need to take over. They have taken over. They have instituted a military government. And now you can see the decisions being taken and implemented swiftly are so fundamental in such a way that today, America and France have been asked to leave the country in a way and manner that has never been seen before on the African continent. For the first time, African nations are able to exercise their sovereignty and say we cannot take it this way anymore. And so now you have a new friend, would I say, a new superpower coming into Africa, namely Russia. Russia has come to replace the current powers that be. And ECOWAS needs to really look much deeper into some of these things. Otherwise, this crisis, as it described, will surely continue. And there's no amount of seminar or some of this posturing that can essentially change the setting.
Okay. All right. It's been actually a wonderful pleasure. There's so much we could, unpack here and discuss about this. Now, if indeed they decide to leave, that's my last question to you. What does that portend for the African continent?
Well, the question is no longer if, because the decision has already been taken.
So there's no talks of them coming back?
Well, yes, the if has to be reversed to say if they come back. That's how it should be, if they come back. But otherwise, as for going, they have already left.
Okay.
Now they have created a scenario which has been, which can be described as unprecedented.
Okay.
And the implication of this is that if one more country joins them, making 4-5, it means ECOWAS would have lost its quota, its quorum would have been distorted, such that there's no meeting of ECOWAS that can be any more legitimate. And that is the greatest danger ECOWAS faces, because it means you will need to go back and rewrite the ECOWAS constitution, or treaty as it is called, the revised treaty. Because it requires that out of the 15 member countries, there is a quorum which becomes legitimate to justify any decision taken. So ECOWAS is at the verge of a real collapse. Because Senegal has given intention to say no more CFA, no more French Central Bank. And so even ECOWAS itself, it says it is pulling out of ECOWAS, which means we are going to have...
ECOWAS is pulling out of ECOWAS?
Yes, Senegal. Senegal has indicated it is also pulling out of ECOWAS, because for it, it's looking at it as more of a Western-styled international organization rather than an African setting. So we have dangers of losing a regional body to internal conflicts, which I think we can avoid by being more sensible in the way we approach some of these things.
It's been a pleasure having you, Ambassador. It's always been a pleasure, having you on the program. Thank you so much for
having me. Thank you.
Thank you. It's still Africa Update right here on Trust TV. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Now, President Bola Tinubu on Thursday said West African countries must unite to crush banditry, terrorism, and other criminal activities plaguing the region. Tinubu stated this at the presidential villa in Abuja while receiving President Bassirou Diomaye Faye of Senegal, where he called for an alignment of purpose and structure in West Africa to effectively address the challenges confronting the region. Now, this is Faye's first visit to Nigeria as president of Senegal. The president also described Nigeria and Senegal as brotherly nations, recounting both countries' long history of cooperation. In his remarks, President Faye acknowledged Nigeria and Senegal's shared values, ideals, and challenges, emphasizing that both nations have always had good relations since the 1960s. Earlier, the FCT Minister, Nyesom Wike, had received the president of Senegal, Bassirou Diomaye Faye, who was visiting Nigeria, and while welcoming him on the arrival at the presidential wing of the Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport, Abuja, on Thursday, on behalf of the President Bola Tinubu, the FCT Minister conferred on him the honorary citizenship of Abuja with the presentation of the symbolic key to the city. Now, according to the Minister, the key confers on Senegalese President all the rights and privileges of a citizen. And that's all much we have for you on Africa Update this week, and it's been quite educative and quite informative. Until see you next week, don't forget to follow us on our social media platforms and on our YouTube live stream. I'm your host, Chiamaka Nwafor. Bye for now.